Hi everybody, Nina D here. I'm going to do a little walkthrough today of the process that I use to learn and record guitar solos on violin. I get a lot of comments and a lot of questions of people who either tell me, you're miming to a guitar, the violin doesn't sound that way, or they don't understand how it's possible to mimic certain guitar sounds on a violin. So I'm going to show you straight out of a box, this is what an electric violin sounds like when it's plugged in to a DAW. And already you can notice the quality is a little different than that of my videos because I'm using my cell phone audio right now. You're listening to the speakers through a cell phone recording. And when I record my videos, it is being mixed professionally into the DAW so that you're hearing a really great sounding mix and not some crappy cell phone recording, because I don't want you guys to listen to crap. I want you to hear it when it's really sounding great. Nobody wants to hear cell phone quality audio. It's 2022. So first of all, here's what the electric violin sounds like plugged straight into the DAW with no effects and nothing else on it. Little thin, meh, little crappy. Half of the battle is not even learning the notes, it is learning how to create proper sounds for the electric violin. So the effects that I have been using lately are in the Line 6 Helix family. I have the big Line 6 Helix board, I have the little stomp boards for when I don't want to carry the big one around, and I also have the Helix native plugin for Logic here, which has all of the same sounds and capabilities as the large performance board, only without having to bend over and make sounds on this board, I can just do it right on the computer. First, let me show you what it sounds like when you actually EQ the clean sound a little bit. That's with a little bit of reverb, a little bit of EQ, and a little bit of delay on the clean sound. Now when you start to add amps and overdrives and different things like that, you can very easily go from that sound to sounds quite a bit like a guitar. So there is the difference between the violin sound and the guitar sound, created solely with Helix native software. This is the sound that I used for my Pink Floyd Comfortably Numb video. So now that you've seen how I am set up here to record the electric violin and create sounds for the electric violin, I go through the process of learning a guitar solo. The very first thing I do is I listen to the song or the solo section ad nauseum until it is memorized in my head. That meaning that I have the notes, the rhythm, and the phrasing memorized enough that I could sing it back out loud. Because if you can sing something, you can play something. And some of these I've been listening to my whole life, and so I've already knew them, and so this step was already completed, by the time I was 7 years old. Some of them I never actually studied the solos that closely, and so they were new, and so I had to learn them this way again. And you don't always have to sing it good, and it doesn't have to be perfectly in tune, but you should be able to hear it in your head and sing it back somewhat accurately in order to then grab your instrument and start learning it on the instrument. So once I've memorized the solo in my head and I can sing it, I then transcribe the solo into notation. So I go through measure by measure and I chart it out with all the correct notes and all the correct rhythms, and then I go back and I put in any bowings and fingerings that I may need in there, any slurs to make it sound like how the guitar player did it, any harmonic notations to know how the guitar player did it, and then I have a full transcription at that point. Now, guitar players who are native guitar players may not completely understand that section of my process, because I think unless you were classically trained, maybe you skip over that part. For me, I can memorize something by ear, but because I was classically trained and I learned by reading music, if I notate it on paper and I go through the process of transcribing it, I can look at the notes, I can see the rhythms, I can see the notes, and I can memorize it in just a couple passes a lot faster by seeing it visually on the paper than I can just by going over it by ear in my head and putting it to the notes on the instrument. And like I said, that's probably because the way I learned was by reading notes on paper to know exactly where my fingers needed to go on the instrument instead of just listening by ear. I learned to play by ear later when I started performing in bands and I had to learn how to solo over changes. So now that the solo is transcribed and it's on paper, the next thing that I do is to start to dissect the guitar player's tone and any stylistic things that may be super important to try and make it sound like the original. Now, there are a lot of people who do violin covers and they sound like a violinist playing them. They may play the notes, they may be really great virtuosic players, and it's amazing to listen to. My thing is that I want to try and make my violin sound like the original as much as possible so that this instrument could actually kind of replace a lead guitar in a band, so to speak. So I go through and I do exactly what I showed you here. I pull up the Helix Native software and I start to create tones. And this is usually after I've studied a little bit on how the original was recorded, what amps were used, which guitars were used, which effects were used, was there chorus, was there flange, how was it EQ'd, you know, what level was the amp turned up to at when it was recorded. And I don't even really need an amp to do a lot of this because there are so many models just right in this software that sound, you know, better than sticking a mic on the actual amp here to do the recording. The trick is, if you just copy the exact settings that the guitar player used to get their tones, they are not going to sound anywhere near the same way on a violin. So they need to be tweaked. You need to take the general ideas of what the guitar player used and you need to apply them for the violin, which is going to be pretty drastically different than how you would make your settings as a guitar player. So now that I have like a basic tone that I can work with to practice the solo on, then what I do is I take the guitar player and I say, okay, what are some of the things that I need to do to really sound like this person in this piece? I'm going to use Beat It, which I just recorded as an example here. Obviously, Eddie Van Halen did this amazing solo I hear in one take, which is just incredible. And how do I do what he did on a violin? So the first thing that comes to mind is he really utilizes the whammy in a lot of his solos. Now, I don't have a whammy on my violin, and so I could do this one of two ways. I could either slide to the note. Let me get an effect on here. So I could slide up to a note, but that doesn't really have the same it doesn't have the same effect as what Eddie does. A lot of violin players, they'll just use the slide instead of the whammy. Now what I do is I've plugged into a Digitech whammy down here and I'm going to attempt to do it the way he would have done it, only I'm going to use my foot instead of a whammy bar. I use my foot and the finger. I really don't even have to do that. I could just start on the note and use just my foot. Either way, it works, and I think it sounds more authentic to Eddie's sound than just going. And the next thing is obviously his knowledge of harmonics, both real harmonics and pinch harmonics, which I'll talk about in a second. The real harmonics are easy to find on a violin. The string is divided in different areas that when you touch the string, this violin is fretted, not all of mine are, but if you touch the string over where some of these harmonic points are, you're going to hear different notes. So for instance, so basically to get that beginning of Beat It, I use the whammy, harmonic, another harmonic. And if you kind of do vibrato on the harmonic, it'll sound a little bit like that. So then we get to the fast notes, which I will usually transcribe. Sometimes last, I'll leave open spaces for the more difficult sections. I'll get the harmonic structure and the easier measures transcribed first. And then I will go back and I will painstakingly get all of the fast notes into my transcription. So then obviously some of that just comes down to working with a metronome. So if it's too fast to play to sight read it, I'll start slower and then I'll slowly work up the metronome clicks, old school style until I can play it up to tempo. That kind of stylistic stuff is really important too, like how I ended that phrase and kind of slid up the string to get that little effect in there. So after that, we have these kind of squeals, these pinch harmonics that happen. Now, how do you do that on a violin? And the best way, I think, to achieve that is with a light, fast bow pressure and a wide vibrato. I think, you know, a lot of people who are covering guitar solos on violin, this is the general rule of thumb for that. So the regular harmonics, you're just touching the string. And for a pinch harmonic, it might be a fingered note, like this one. Now I'm going to play that note, and I'm going to lighten up my bow pressure, and I'm going to do a real wide vibrato. So those kind of squeals you can kind of get by doing those little tricks. One of the other things, the other type of harmonic that I'll use is a false harmonic. I did this like in the Living on a Prayer solo, where you finger the first note, push down, and then you will just touch the string with your fourth finger, and it will play a harmonic of whatever note that you're playing. So instead of, you're gonna hear like that. And so you can kind of, those aren't real notes, those are false harmonics. Kind of also another way to get that pinch harmonic feel that a guitar player would have. So another technique that Eddie uses is obviously tapping. This is another thing that you don't really need to do that on a violin. You can do it with your bow. And so I'm not going to go over that in this video because I'm making another video which will feature that predominantly. But in this particular solo, I wasn't able to use that style because it moves too quickly, and I didn't have the correct open strings. The violin is tuned in fifths. A guitar is not tuned in fifths like that. So, you know, it's pretty impossible to go from a finger position and back to your bow in enough time in this super fast solo to do that. So when you see the video, I just used bow technique to emulate the tapping this time. But depending on the key of the song and which notes are being used, it's totally possible. And I use the whammy again at the end there to really get those low notes in there. So basically, that's how I put together Beat It, and practiced it for probably 3 days with a metronome to be able to play it up to tempo. And here's the final product.